Every school textbook tells you the same story. Ferdinand Magellan arrived in the Philippines in 1521. He was killed in battle by a local chieftain named Lapu-Lapu. End of story. But here is the thing. That is not the full story. Not even close. Because what actually happened on that beach in Mactan, on the morning of April 27, 1521, was far more complex, far more political, far more human, and far more revealing about the true nature of early Spanish contact with the Philippines than any textbook has ever told you. Because there were not just two sides to this story, there were three. And the third side is the one that changes everything. This is Mythos Amit Raj, and today we are going back to Mactan to find out what really happened, who was really responsible, and what this moment tells us about the Filipino people that no colonizer ever wanted you to know. Hey history lovers, quick favor before we start. If you enjoy today's video, please help me reach 5,000 likes and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing historical stories. Before we begin, I need to tell you something important. The story of Magellan's death is not just a story about one battle. It is a story about power, about politics, about a Filipino leader who made a choice. That changed the course of Philippine history forever. And it is a story about how much of what we think we know comes from only one side, the side that survived to write it down. We will get to that. But first, let me take you back to the beginning. Welcome back to Mythos Amit Raj, the channel that goes beneath the surface of history to find the stories that were buried, forgotten, or told only from one perspective. Today we are tackling one of the most famous moments in Philippine history, the death of Ferdinand Magellan. But we are not going to tell it the way your textbook told it. We are going to tell it the way it actually happened. With all the politics, all the complexity, all the humanity. Stay with me, because what comes next will completely change how you see this story. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will see Lapu-Lapu very differently than you did before. To understand Magellan's death, you first need to understand who Magellan actually was. Because most people think of him as an explorer, a brave navigator, a man of science and discovery. And that is part of the truth, but only part. Ferdinand Magellan was also a man of empire. Born in Portugal around 1480, he had spent decades in the service of colonial expansion. He had sailed to India, to Malacca, to the Spice Islands. He had witnessed and participated in the brutal machinery of European colonization firsthand. When he arrived in the Philippines in March 1521, sailing under the Spanish flag after falling out with the Portuguese crown, he was not simply a curious explorer mapping unknown coastlines. He was a conquistador, a man on a mission, funded by the Spanish crown to claim territories, establish trade routes, and extend Spanish power across the globe. He carried with him the absolute conviction that European civilization was superior, that Christian faith was the only valid faith, and that any people who resisted Spanish authority were obstacles to be removed. That conviction would kill him. Within weeks of arriving in the Philippines, Magellan had already begun the process of political manipulation that would ultimately lead to his death. He performed mass baptisms, he planted crosses, he demanded tributes and pledges of loyalty to the Spanish crown from local rulers who had been governing their own societies for generations, and many of them, calculating the risks, complied. But here is where the story gets complicated. Because Magellan's death was not simply a brave local chieftain defending his island against a foreign invader. It was the final consequence of a political chess game that Magellan himself had started, and that he catastrophically misread. But here is what most people never ask. Why was Magellan even on that beach? Why did the most important man in the entire Spanish expedition, the commander, the navigator, the man whose entire mission depended on staying alive, why did he personally lead a military attack on a relatively small island with only 60 men? That question has a very interesting answer if you are still with me. Good. Because we are about to meet the man at the center of this story, and he is not who you think he is. His name was Rajah Humabon, the ruler of Cebu, and he is the key to understanding everything. When Magellan arrived in Cebu, Rajah Humabon made a calculated decision. He welcomed the Spanish. He converted to Christianity, accepting baptism in a ceremony that Magellan used as a powerful political and symbolic act. He allowed Magellan to claim his allegiance to the Spanish crown. He even received a gift, the Santo Niño, the image of the child Jesus, that is still venerated in Cebu today as one of the most sacred religious icons in the Philippines. But Rajah Humabon was not a naive man. He was not a man who had been dazzled by foreign religion and foreign power. He was a sophisticated political operator, a ruler who had been navigating complex regional politics long before any Spanish ship appeared on the horizon. And he saw in Magellan something very useful, a weapon. Because Rajah Humabon had a problem. His name was Datu Lapu-Lapu. Lapu-Lapu was the ruler of the nearby island of Mactan, and he refused to submit, refused to pay tribute to Rajah Humabon, refused to acknowledge Spanish authority, refused to convert to Christianity. He was, by every account, an independent, defiant, and politically astute leader who had no interest in foreign powers telling him what to do. Some historians believe Lapu-Lapu and Humabon had a pre-existing rivalry, a long-running political tension between their two domains that predated the Spanish arrival entirely. If that is true, then Magellan did not stumble into a conflict on Mactan. He was guided into it, deliberately, by a man who understood exactly how to use Spanish pride as a tool. And Rajah Humabon knew exactly how to use Magellan's ego against him. He presented Lapu-Lapu's defiance as a personal insult to Magellan, as a challenge to Spanish authority, as something that needed to be dealt with. And Magellan, proud, ambitious, overconfident after weeks of easy political victories, took the bait. And here is the detail that most textbooks leave out completely. Magellan's own officers tried to stop him. According to the account of Antonio Pigafetta, the Italian scholar who sailed with Magellan and survived to document the entire expedition, Magellan's captains and crew strongly advised against the attack on Mactan. They warned him the terrain was unfavorable, that the number of warriors defending Mactan was far larger than their force of 60 men, that the risk was simply not worth it. Magellan ignored every warning. He was so certain of Spanish military superiority, so convinced that his armored soldiers with their European weapons could not possibly be defeated by indigenous warriors, that he refused all offers of additional help. Rajah Humabon offered his own warriors to assist in the attack. Magellan refused. He reportedly said that he wanted to demonstrate the power of Christian soldiers without any local assistance. He wanted to make a statement, to prove something, not to Lapu-Lapu, but to Rajah Humabon. and to every other Filipino ruler watching from the shore. This was not a military decision, this was pride. And on the morning of April 27th, 1521, pride walked into the water at Mactan and never walked back out. We are at the halfway point, and we have not even gotten to the beach yet. Do not click away. Before we go further, I want you to understand something about Lapu-Lapu. That is almost never discussed. He knew Magellan was coming. He had time to prepare. And what he did with that time was nothing short of brilliant. The morning of April 27th, 1521, Magellan's force of approximately 60 armored Spanish soldiers attempted to land on the shores of Mactan. But here is something that most versions of this story gloss over. The waters off Mactan were shallow, dangerously shallow for the Spanish longboats. They could not reach the beach. The soldiers were forced to abandon their boats and wade ashore through chest-deep water in full metal armor. Think about what that actually means. Heavy steel plate, soaking wet, moving at a fraction of normal speed, through unpredictable tidal terrain with uneven footing hidden beneath murky water. Before they had even reached dry land, they were already exhausted, already off balance, already vulnerable. And Lapu-Lapu had been watching, waiting. He had positioned his warriors strategically along the shore. He had studied the water. He had chosen this ground deliberately, because Lapu-Lapu understood something that Magellan did not. Spanish armor, which made their soldiers nearly invincible on open flat terrain, became a liability in shallow water. Spanish firearms, which were devastating at range on dry land, lost much of their effectiveness in close-quarters combat in the surf. So he did not fight the battle the Spanish expected. He dragged them into the water, into the mud, into chaos. And then he attacked. What followed was not a glorious last stand by a heroic explorer. It was a military catastrophe, a catastrophic miscalculation by an overconfident commander who had been outmaneuvered by a tactically superior opponent on ground that Lapu-Lapu had specifically engineered to destroy him. Lapu-Lapu's warriors, vastly outnumbering the Spanish force, swarmed the soldiers in the shallow water. They targeted the legs, the one part of the body that Spanish armor consistently left exposed. They used bamboo spears, poisoned arrows, bladed weapons that did not require the brute force to penetrate metal, but could find every gap, every joint, every weakness in European armor. And they kept coming. Wave after wave. Magellan himself was struck multiple times. First an arrow in the leg, then a bamboo spear to the face, then surrounded, overwhelmed, cut down in the shallow water of Mactan Beach, while his crew, those who survived, fled back to their boats and left their commander's body behind. Rajah Humabon, who had watched the entire battle from his own boats offshore, did not intervene, not once. And here is the question that historians have debated ever since. Did Rajah Humabon watch Magellan die and do nothing because he could not help, or because he chose not to? We are almost at the end. But this last part changes everything about how we should understand this story. Do not leave yet. In the weeks after Magellan's death, something happened that reveals the full political complexity of this moment. Something that most history books mention briefly and then move past far too quickly. Rajah Humabon, the man who had converted to Christianity, the man who had pledged allegiance to Spain, the man who had used Magellan as a weapon against Lapu-Lapu, invited the surviving Spanish officers to a farewell feast. It was presented as a celebration, a gesture of friendship and goodwill. The surviving Spanish officers, exhausted, leaderless, still reeling from the disaster at Mactan, accepted the invitation. 27 of them attended. Most of them never left. Rajah Humabon had them killed, massacred at a dinner in Cebu, just days after Magellan died on the beach at Mactan. This was not an impulsive act of anger. This was not revenge. This was a calculated, cold, politically precise decision. Rajah Humabon had studied the Spanish. He had used their power when it served him. He had absorbed whatever diplomatic and military advantages their presence offered. And then, when Magellan died and the balance of power shifted irreversibly, he eliminated the Spanish presence before it could take root, before it could become permanent, before it could become colonial rule. This tells us something profound about the world Magellan had walked into. Rajah Humabon was not a man who had been conquered, not a man who had been genuinely converted. He was a man who had been strategically managing foreign powers, the way sophisticated rulers have always managed foreign powers, on his own terms, for his own purposes, for the benefit of his own people. So what is the real truth of Magellan's death? The truth is this: Magellan was not simply a heroic explorer killed by a savage chieftain. He was an overconfident military commander who allowed his pride to override his judgment, who was manipulated by a politically sophisticated local ruler who understood European ambition better than Magellan understood Filipino politics, and who was outmaneuvered and defeated by a tactically brilliant opponent on terrain that Lapu-Lapu had specifically chosen to neutralize every single Spanish advantage. Lapu-Lapu was not just a warrior, he was a strategist, a military genius, a man who understood that the best way to defeat a superior force is to make them fight on your terms, not theirs. And Rajah Humabon, far from being a converted ally of Spain, was playing a longer and more sophisticated political game than Magellan ever realized. The Spanish came to the Philippines expecting to find people they could easily conquer. What they found instead were political operators, warriors, strategists, people who had been navigating the complex currents of Southeast Asian power politics for centuries before any European ship arrived. And on the morning of April the 27th, 1521, on a shallow beach on the island of Mactan, that reality became impossible to ignore. This is the truth that Mythos Amit Raj exists to tell. Not just what happened, but why it happened, and what it reveals about the people, the real people, at the center of the story. Lapu-Lapu is remembered as a hero, and he deserves every word of that. But the full story of what happened at Mactan is even more extraordinary than the legend. It is a story of intelligence over brute force, strategy over pride, local knowledge over foreign firepower, and the absolute refusal of a people to be told who they are by anyone who arrives on their shores with ships and cannons. That spirit did not begin with Lapu-Lapu. It did not end with him either, and it has never, not once, been fully extinguished. In the next video, we are going even deeper into the world that existed in the Philippines before Magellan ever arrived, the Kingdom of Tondo, the forgotten empire that ruled the northern Philippines and traded with China for centuries, long before any Spanish ship appeared on the horizon. That story is coming, and I promise you, it is extraordinary. But before I go, I want to hear from you. Did this version of the story surprise you? Did you learn about Rajah Humabon's role in school, or was that left out of your textbooks entirely? And here is the bigger question. Do you think Lapu-Lapu knew exactly what he was doing politically? Or was his resistance purely about defending his island? Drop your answer in the comments below. Let us talk about it. Like this video if it gave you something real. Share it with a Filipino who needs to hear this story. And subscribe to Mythos Amit Raj so you never miss what we uncover next. Salamat, and I will see you inside the next one.